Hey therapists, I think we all know that work doesn't end when the session does. There's the notes, the scheduling, the billing, the insurance follow-ups. All of the admin work can quietly take over your nights and weekends, and I know this to be true because I have done it myself for many years. But recently, Psychologist Off the Clock co-hosts Debbie, Emily, and Jill convinced me to try out Simple Practice, and I'm so glad I did. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high-trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. The beautiful thing is that it brings all the things together that you would otherwise have to do in piecemeal fashion. That's scheduling, billing, insurance, client communication. It's all in one place so you're not juggling multiple systems just to run your practice. I love that the forms are customizable and make documentation much faster and less draining, and I really appreciate that I don't have to spend hours each month generating invoices for clients. What's more, if you're just starting out or growing your practice, they also have a credentialing service that helps you to get paneled independently. It takes the total headache out of the insurance enrollment, giving you full autonomy over your own contracts without any middleman platforms taking a cut. If you are ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is a great time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial, then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
Basically, physical attractiveness kind of has nothing to do with the viability of a long-term relationship, one way or the other. What's also kind of fascinating is that even once these relationships are starting to get off the ground, it's fascinating how quickly physical attractiveness takes a backseat to other qualities like what two people are building together.
That was Paul Eastwick on Psychologist Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and Why Don't You Understand Me?
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
If you hit play on an episode about the evolutionary science of how humans bond, congratulations, you're a relationship nerd. Welcome, you are among friends. And since you are my people, a quick note. My new book, Why Don't You Understand Me, is out October 27th and is available for pre-order now. Pre-order and let me know, and I'll send you some bonuses as a thank you. Order 12 or more copies for a book club, a workshop, a therapist training, and I'll join you on a Zoom for a 30-minute mini workshop or Q&A. That's right, I can be bought. Link in the show notes. Please do stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host post discussion. Okay, on to the episode. If you've ever confidently rated yourself a solid 7 on the dating market, quietly assessed a potential partner's mate value, or assumed that men and women are just wired differently when it comes to love, today's guest has some news for you, and it's pretty good news. Paul Eastwick is a professor of psychology at UC Davis, where he runs the Attraction and Relationships Research Laboratory. His work sits at the intersection of evolutionary psychology, social psychology, and close relationships research. Paul's new book, Bonded by Evolution: The New Science of Human Attachment, shares insights that challenge the conventional wisdom about attraction, including making the argument that the dominant narrative about human mating, the one that tells us attraction is about hierarchy, competition, and genetic optimization, is not just incomplete, it's wrong. Paul is also the co-host of one of my absolute favorite podcasts, Love Factually, which he runs with Northwestern psychology professor Eli Finkel. This podcast fact-checks Hollywood rom-coms one movie at a time because apparently Clueless is not a documentary. Paul, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Thank you so much for having me. It's true. I wish at least parts of Clueless had been a documentary, but it turns out that doesn't quite work out that way.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
If we could all be Cher.
I know. Or Ty, for that matter.
Or Ty. I love Ty. Okay.
So let's dig into your book, because there is so much in there. There's no way we'll cover even a fraction of it. And it's such a great read for those who are curious about the science of romantic relationships.
Yeah.
But one of the concepts that you thread throughout is this concept of the Evo script. So most people have never heard of the term Evo script, but I suspect they've absorbed a lot of its core assumptions. And I wonder if you can start us off by describing what it is and a little bit about what's so wrong about it.
Yeah, so I use this term EvoScript to refer to, it's like the popular wisdom version of evolutionary psychology that has grown out of the science that came out in like the 1990s or so. And that at the time was state of the art, but a lot of that original work has really stuck in the popular consciousness, despite the fact that some of the scientific components actually haven't held up all that well. So briefly, the three components that I describe, and then we can get into sort of what these things get wrong, are that mate value is central to the way relationships work, that the nines get with the nines and the twos get with the twos, and people are always trying to trade up on each other, and you got to punch your weight. The second idea is that men and women are extremely different when it comes to love and romance. They might as well be different species. You might as well read about them in separate chapters of textbooks. And the third idea is that there's this distinction between short-term mating and long-term mating, and you kind of got to specialize in one or the other, depending on what you're good at. All three of these ideas appear in popular dating advice, canon, all over the place, but actually all three have run into some challenges.
Yeah, so you describe this framework as thrilling and wrong, but what makes it so compelling in the first place? Like, if it is wrong, why is it so persistent?
Yeah, okay, so there's a couple elements here. I mean, I think when evolutionary psychology came on the scene in the 90s, they very rightfully pointed out that, we really do need to be thinking about how the architecture of the human mind evolved. What are all the ways that our modern environment fails to match with the environment in which we evolved? These are very important questions, and drawing from principles of natural selection to understand why we think the way that we do, these are really good ideas. I think, though, that some of the work coming out of evolutionary psychology in those early years just happened to focus on one particular evolutionary way of viewing humans. Sometimes this is what happens, right? I mean, fields, they focus on a few things and they get narrow without even necessarily realizing it. And it turned out, and this is unusual, I think, but it turned out that there was this whole other field at that time also studying pretty much exactly the same topic. And this was the field of relationship science, the field that I primarily identify with. And what we see in relationship science is that there are these other messages that are also grounded well in evolutionary theories and natural selection and everything else that are very hard to fit with that original evolutionary narrative. So to me, this is one of these classic cases of, look, evolution is a compelling idea. It's very psychologically useful. And the first movers out of the gate set the tone for what evolutionary psychology meant. But one of the reasons I wrote the book is because I wanted to point out, it's not the only evolutionary story out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because I think and you say this quite a few times throughout your book, that if you talk to a couples therapist about evolutionary theory, about, who matches with who and what predicts relationship outcomes, most couples therapists will be like, no, it's way more complicated. It doesn't sort of fall out. And that's certainly been my experience as a practicing couples therapist.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet you probably don't spend a lot of time bringing in couples and being like, well, your mate values mismatch. So, I mean, that's really the fundamental problem between the two of you. I mean, have you ever uttered that phrase?
I've never uttered that phrase.
Yeah, oh my God. I mean, even if it were true that this was the source of a problem, it's not clear what you do with that. It's a lens that I think makes a lot of sense if what you're studying is how do people evaluate photographs or vignettes of people they've never met. Or I think, too, what happens in first impression contexts, where we see a lot of agreement about who's desirable and who's not. And as I make clear in the book, look, assortative mating on desirable characteristics is a real phenomenon. There's a real correlation. It's far from perfect, but a real correlation between, a couple members' attractiveness levels. But one thing I'm always very quick to immediately point out is that, okay, yes, there is a correlation there on average, but the extent to which you match or mismatch somebody when you're in a relationship with them predicts nothing about what ultimately is going to happen to your relationship. So it's not a surprise to me that you have not really spent much time thinking about that.
Yeah. And I mean, you make this point, too, that a lot of what we use to assign a mate value, are you a 2 or a 9, is fairly subjective anyway and changes over time as you get to know people.
I think what surprised people, I like this thought experiment. So here, if we had the job to judge whether this other guy sitting in front of us was hot or not, simple binary. So if this was our job, we would agree about 65% of the time. So that's greater than 50-50, but it's far from determinative. And what that means is that even if people in general agree that somebody is a 7, for example, what that means is that underlying that 7 judgment, some people think you're a 6, some people think you're an 8. It's not a perfect agreement there. And as you point out, that level of agreement shifts as people get to know each other. So if you look in groups where friends and acquaintances are interacting repeatedly, getting to know each other over the course of weeks and months, that 65% is going to start dropping, okay? With a few weeks, it becomes 60%. A few months, it's starting to become closer to 55%. And eventually, if you look at folks who have known each other for a while, I mean, these were like the mixed gender groups that I spent time in as a young adult and as a teenager. It's like 53%. We're agreeing 53% of the time about who the dateable people are. And what that means is that, well, look, if you're like a 9 consensually, that's actually not great for you. Because it means some people think you're a 4 in that group. But it means that if you're consensually rated as a 4, some people think you're a 9 or even a 10. And that means more people have a chance to form a relationship in a case where the two people think each other are 10s. And I think that's a wonderful thing. That means that more people get a chance to form a relationship in a context that doesn't feel so dire and so competitive.
Yeah. Yeah. So it just gives you a lot more wiggle room to think about what your potential is, how it could go for you. The best summer pieces are the ones you end up wearing on repeat. Comfortable, versatile, and somehow right for almost every occasion. That's why I love Quince. They make elevated essentials using premium materials like European linen, organic cotton, and washable silk without the traditional retail markup. Everything at Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman, so you're paying for exceptional quality rather than brand markup. On a more personal note, for about a decade, my bags have said, "Functional Mom." The Sloan hand-woven mini shoulder bag just arrived at my house, and the gorgeous weave detail says, "Stylish woman who has places to be." Both are true. One of them just hasn't had a good bag in a while. But it's not just apparel. Quince also has elevated essentials for your home, from bedding and bath to kitchen essentials and furniture. Make your summer wardrobe feel easier. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/POTC for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Every day as a small business owner feels like solving a puzzle. One moment you're cruising along, and the next, there's a shipping snag that has you scrambling. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So go ahead, surprise yourself. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
Another piece of what you talk about in your book, and which emerges out of your research, that just kind of blew my mind about how to think about much of the research in evolutionary psychology. And I'll tell the story that I recently read a Substack post by an evolutionary psychologist that I follow, sharing a new study that revealed that willingness to protect a partner dramatically increases attractiveness, and that this holds across genders. And it was presented as exciting new science. But after reading your book, I noticed something. It was based entirely on what people said in response to vignettes, not what they actually did or chose. And can you explain why that distinction matters so much?
Yeah, we see this distinction mattering a lot. And I saw that study too. It's very interesting. Look, vignettes can tell us a lot about how people think, but what we see over and over again is that the way people evaluate potential partners, the mental processes that come into play, the standards they use changes quite a bit depending on whether they're swiping or they're looking at a photo or a vignette, or it's a live person right there in front of them. When people are engaged in live interactions, it's almost like there's a wholly different psychology that comes into play. Because what people focus on less is this purely evaluative, like, okay, exactly how do you stack up relative to my list of must-haves? People are very good at doing that when they're swiping. But face-to-face, they kind of let the lists go. They are willing to let go of the deal breakers, and they focus instead on things like, is this interaction going smoothly? Am I doing my part to keep this interaction going smoothly? And also, like, how does this person make me feel? It's very hard to get a sense of how another person makes you feel when you're reading a vignette about somebody. So, look, I use both in my research, but I always come at these studies with the assumption that there is something psychologically very different about reading a vignette relative to meeting somebody else face to face.
Yeah. And I think what your research shows, and I would love for you to talk a little bit about this, is that what we say we want doesn't necessarily match up with what we actually want.
Yeah, this has been one of the great challenges of the last 15 years in this work. The way I like to think about this problem is like this. Look, we mentioned earlier, people disagree about who's dateable and who's not. That's even true in first impression context, and it becomes more true over time. So we also want to try to explain. All right. So you think this person's a 10 when everybody else thinks they're a 6. Why is that? And a very obvious answer would seem to be, well, there are particular idiosyncratic deal breakers that I have in mind when I'm thinking about a partner. There are certain things I want somebody to have. So it must be that that person matches my list of deal breakers, and that's why they seem especially appealing to me. If only it worked so simply.
If only it were so simple.
I know, yes. It turns out that sort of matching process isn't a great way of explaining why compatibility is so important. We've seen this in a number of different studies. Probably, I think the one that clarifies this idea the best is, look, here you are, and I'm setting you up on a date. And I've got you.
He's so pleased.
Yeah, right. I'll do my best impression of a matchmaker here. Okay. So I get 3 deal breakers from you. So let's say you tell me, I want to go on a date with somebody who's adventurous and hot and exciting. All right. So here's the guy. I got him right here. Wait, hold on. Pause. Are you attracted to men or women or both?
Men.
Men. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Don't want to assume. Okay. So I got this guy right here, and he's got those 3 qualities. And indeed, you're going to like him on that date. But let's say, oops, I mixed up the forms, and this form says you want somebody who's supportive and warm and ambitious. Okay. And I send you on a date with him. You're likely to like that guy just as much as the first guy. So it's true that these are desirable qualities, but if if you imagine a waiter mixing up 2 people's orders, and, bringing you the wrong order, it's like you wouldn't have even noticed. And that's kind of wild that we seem to lack this kind of self-insight about what really is going to appeal to us specifically.
Yeah, and I think that that's such an interesting finding that is so hard to believe, but the science consistently shows this to be true. One of my favorite studies was published in Science. I think the lead author was McNulty. But and you're probably familiar with it. But it was a study of newlyweds, and it followed them for 4 years, and it measured both their sort of automatic unconscious beliefs about their partner through response time to photographs and positive and negative words, and then explicit conscious attitudes about their partner. And what they found was that the conscious explicit, like the what can you tell me about how you feel about your partner, did not predict long-term relationship satisfaction. And also that those conscious predictions weren't associated with your unconscious ones, and that your unconscious ones did predict your long-term relationship satisfaction. So there is something to this, like we think we know, but we don't know ourselves, because insight is a complicated thing. And there's so much that is sort of like about social desirability, and that's shaped by our cultural pressures and so on and so forth, that it's really hard for us to detect what actually works for us relationally speaking. But even as I say that, like, it's hard for me to accept, like, I don't know what I want. That's crazy. Of course I know what I want.
Yeah. And like the way that I like to think about this is that when people tell me I love my partner because he is adventurous, I believe statements like that. But because if I were to wave a magic wand, and I can't do this and I wouldn't do this, but I can do this with like experimental designs. But if I could wave a magic wand and make your partner less adventurous, you'd be like, what the hell? Like, I don't like this. Turn him back. And so that's all completely reasonable. People seem to understand, why do I like this person right here in front of me? The challenge is that doesn't always conform to this abstract template of what you might like in general. And it's why we've kind of pivoted to a wholly different kind of explanation for why some pairs are especially compatible. Why do these two people think that each other are tens? And why some pairs are not. And that these explanations focus much more on what two people construct together over time, their shared history, their shared rituals and in-jokes and weird idiosyncrasies that only they share together, that really are wholly different than matching what you want to some sort of template, up here in your mind.
Absolutely. And I'm going to put a pin in that, because I want to talk about what compatibility is and how to build it. But before we do that, I want to sort of poke holes in some more myths. One of the things that you delve into in your book that evolutionary psychology talks a lot about is the differences between men and women in what they want in a partner and in a relationship. And I wonder if you can share what are some differences that are true, and then where does the evolutionary psychology script really lead us astray in misunderstanding gender differences and similarities?
Yeah, this is a great question. I actually love starting with the where are there meaningful gender differences, because I don't want to minimize the real important gender differences. I think the clearest ones that you see surround sex, mostly surrounding casual sex, and mostly surrounding casual sex with strangers. Okay. So I put all those caveats in there for a reason, because when you look at men's and women's interest in having sex with strangers of the other gender, that's when the difference really comes to the fore. Of course, there's the famous, it's called the 3 questions study, but everybody only remembers the third question, which was, would you go to bed with me? This is one stranger to another. And in the largest replications of this study that you've seen, it's something on the order of 5% of women say yes and 40% of men say yes. That's a very, very large gender difference.
in these studies, attractive people were selected to approach people of the opposite sex and proposition them, which is just hilarious.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, legendarily, these were supposedly some very hot research assistants. That's the lore behind this study. But here are some interesting caveats about this particular gender difference. Now, let's not make it strangers. Let's instead be like, oh, people from your everyday life. Like, when has this really happened in a way that wasn't contrived by an experimenter? Those percentages shift a lot. It becomes something like 70% of men say yes. It's pretty high. And like 40% of women say yes. Okay, so that's, again, that's a more medium-sized gender difference. It's still very real. But notice, when we went to the strangers, okay, not a common occurrence in our ancestral past, I might point out. We didn't meet many strangers, certainly not immediately propositioning us for sex. But once we go to an environment that would more closely match our evolutionary past, yeah, that difference is there, but it's much smaller in magnitude. Now let's go to ongoing close relationships. The difference is smaller still. It's not zero. But if I were to look at, okay, who wants to have sex in this mixed gender pair at a given moment in time on a given day, and these two are in a relationship together, it's maybe 55-45 likely to be the man. So that's a gender difference, but it's pretty modest on the whole. So these are all real gender differences, but let's take seriously the magnitude as it extends across these different contexts, because I think that tells us something very important about the underlying psychology here.
Yeah, and I think that there's such a danger in saying that there's an extreme gender difference when there's not, because it creates a lack of permission, for example, for women to express that they have desire that isn't getting met or that they want to just be more expressive about in their relationship because the norms are so off kilter from what feels true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my favorite example of this is the 1977 film Annie Hall. Now, boy, this film is complicated in a lot of ways, but I know I watched this movie before I ever had sex. That because I know I saw this as a pretty young teenager. And if you count the instances in that movie of in these ongoing relationships, who's more interested in sex? It's like the guy 80% of the time. Okay, there's one instance in that movie where the woman in the partnership is more interested in sex. So, okay, I thought this was how it worked. I think in the 70s and in the 80s, this is how people thought it worked. That's an accurate reflection of what was going on at the time. It's just, we know today, not reflected in the science. It's not nearly that stark.
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll talk a bit more about this, but I think part of what your work and your book are trying to do is to correct what has been misunderstood for a lot of reasons, including that there's been really damaging parts of the way that people assume men versus women operate in romantic relationships. And it really can cause disconnects between people, like this sort of adage of boys will be boys in ways that are really problematic and that don't actually fit for what anybody wants.
This has gotten spun out online in ways that I think, I hope, suspect that we will look back on this era and think, what a bunch of weird messages we were giving to young boys. We were basically telling them, don't be friends with women. That's dangerous. We were telling them, hit the gym early and often. You got to boost your attributes and boost your traits, or nobody's going to pay any attention to you. And we were telling them, be tough and stoic and don't show any weakness. I think all of this advice is overblown at best and deeply misguided at worst, especially when it comes to the building relationships with people of the gender that you prefer. Because actually, women don't really want stoic providers. They want people who are sensitive and caring and understanding and supportive. These are the hallmarks of close relationships. We see this time and time again in the research. And by the way, there's a great evolutionary argument for this, which is that human men had to evolve to be better caregivers. We are far better caregivers, yes, even of young infants, than our closest ape relatives. That's because the women chose us to be this way over the last several million years. So we are just so twisted around right now with the messages that we have about the evolved nature of men and everything else. It's a total mess. And yeah, I'm out here trying to set the record straight.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you are. And you just provided a nice segue into diving a little deeper into this concept of mate value. This idea also kind of shows up a lot on the manosphere, that each of us has a kind of romantic stock price that shows, whether it's in online dating optimization advice and pickup artist culture, and apparently also in peer-reviewed papers. So is there anything to this idea that we do sort of have this fundamental, like we come into the world, we look a certain way, we have certain personality traits? Is there a way that does have some truth to it?
I would say you can point to it in a couple places. One is what we talked about earlier, the idea that there is assortative mating on desirable traits like attractiveness. And I think the best explanation for why you see that is that in initial impression context specifically, attractive people are really good at competing for the other attractive people. Again, I think we overestimate the power of this effect, but it's certainly there. What you'll also see is that when it comes to things like, number of sex partners, right? Like how many hookup partners have you had? Even how many dating relationships have you had? Physically attractive people or people with a lot of social confidence, they'll end up having more sex partners, more casual dating partners. There are different perspectives, competing perspectives actually, on what that should mean in the long term. One of these ideas is that, well, if you're good at the short term realm, that means you're probably bad at the long term realm. It means you're a flight risk, or you're too hot for your own good, and you might get in a relationship, but you're going to be poached away because women or men will be throwing themselves at you. We don't see that in the data. Basically, physical attractiveness kind of has nothing to do with the viability of a long-term relationship, one way or the other. What's also kind of fascinating is that even once these relationships are starting to get off the ground, it's fascinating how quickly physical attractiveness takes a backseat to other qualities, like what two people are building together. I mean, we see this actually in a matter of just weeks. Like if I use Coder ratings of somebody's attractiveness to predict how desirable they are at a speed dating event, you're going to see a healthy association there. If I do the same thing, I use Coder rated attractiveness to predict how you feel about somebody that you're maybe into. Oh, you've been hanging out with him for a few weeks now. Coder rated attractiveness isn't doing anything to predict whether this is something you want to pursue or disengage from. So again, it matters. It matters in the aggregate, but it really matters for like how many notches you rack up on your bedpost, more than it has anything to do with your long-term prospects, good or bad.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that the dating market and certainly, like that websites and other products are trying to monetize are far less predictive than compatibility. Compatibility is, it turns out, what matters the most. So I wonder if you can start us off by even defining, like, what is compatibility?
Yeah. So I really like this nerdy mathematical definition of compatibility, which is it's the amount of idiosyncrasy that exists when people are saying, hey, I'd like to date this person or not. But the challenge is that we don't really know where compatibility comes from in the first place. It seems like it should be something that's there, like latent between two people. Like, here are all the qualities of you, your preferences, your values, your traits, and everything else you might tell us about yourself. And that if I knew all of that information and I had the same information about a bunch of people you might want to date, that I could use some sort of algorithm to fit you together. We've done exactly this with machine learning approaches, and we can't explain any of it. We can explain who's popular. Yeah. We can explain like who's desperate, but we can't explain who uniquely fits with whom at all. And this was like my wake up call. That was like, oh, we have misunderstood. Like, we know compatibility is important, but we misunderstand where it lives. It doesn't live at the intersection of two people's traits. It has to come from something else. And we think that something else is what two people kind of construct along the way.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Yeah. So one of these machine learning studies was led by one of your colleagues, Samantha Joel. And what's so funny is I remember reading this paper when it came out and thinking, this just kind of feels so right, because basically it looked across, I think it was 43 longitudinal couple studies to look at what predicts relationship satisfaction. It was like not much, except for what you think about your partner, which is quite subjective. And that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would surprise people because, yes, in long-term relationships too, very little of what's going on in explaining why some couples are happy and some couples are miserable is at the intersection of the two people's traits. Like, you tell me if I've correctly diagnosed what a relationship therapist would be looking for. But if I'm a relationship therapist, I would come at a couple and I'd be looking for two things. Number one, probably first and foremost, is what is the dynamic between the two of you? What are the patterns that the two of you have found yourselves in that need unpacking and unwinding? What are the rituals you've created for yourselves that are maybe building distance rather than closeness? So I would unpack all of that history. And second, I would then look to an individual person's lens or view of the world. It's true that some people are higher in emotional instability. They're more upset by things. And therapy can help with stuff like that, individual therapy. So you can do that to help a person, or you can unpack the patterns. But I don't know. Like, again, you tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think I'd be looking at things like, oh, well, you're extroverted and he's introverted. And we know that combination tends not to work.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting reading your book as a couples therapist. And it's also funny because I had been preparing for our conversation early this morning, and then I saw couples, which is all I see in my private practice right now. Yeah. So I hadn't thought about it in these terms, but when I do therapy, I genuinely think that the thing that I'm always trying to do is help people to repair or build compatibility. That has either gotten broken or just never got off the ground in a way that was sustainable. So, I had not thought about it that way, but I really think that is the case.
Yeah. And I think the wild idea, and again, like as a scientist, I feel like some of my job is like I'm supposed to like at least suggest the wildest version of the idea to see how it sticks. But the wildest version of the idea is this, is that all of this, you just mentioned like compatibility getting off the ground. Well, what if that explains why some speed dates go well and some don't? Like, as I say this, I don't even know how much I believe it. That, well, wait a minute. Here's the speed date between these two people, and it was kind of middling. But you're telling me that if I reran that several times, gave them different things to try talking about, different sets of in-jokes to try out in 4 minutes, that I would have gotten them to like each other much more than they did, than the control condition. I don't know, maybe.
I believe it. And I'll tell you why, because this is something that I think about a lot as a therapist in general, not even just as a couples therapist. But in the room as a therapist, one of my goals, because positive regard is so critical to forming a therapeutic alliance, is to like the people that I work with. And some people genuinely are harder to like. They're just a little pricklier. They are a little more argumentative. They don't have the same values as I do. They may have done things that I find to be immoral or problematic in some way. And yet, if I set my mind to it, and I don't think there's anything special about me except that I'm willing to do this.
Yeah.
But it's not like a talent. It's like a choice to look for something that I like, that I can connect with this person on. And I have never not been able to do it. And what's interesting, I'll mention too, is that I'm working on a book on why we misunderstand one another. And one of the things I had an opportunity to do was to interview all of these people, including detectives who interviewed serial killers and hostage negotiators who interviewed hostage takers. And what sets them apart is their ability to find a way to connect with people who have done like heinous things. And that helps them to understand, connect with people, and then have some persuasive capacity with them. So I actually think that you're kind of tentative about like, could anybody be compatible with somebody else? And I don't necessarily think anyone could marry somebody else, but I think there's almost always a way to connect with somebody if you choose to be open-minded and flexible enough to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of love this idea, and I love your reflections on this idea as I think about, if my job was really matchmaker and I was bringing all these couples together in the lab. I'm not actually a matchmaker. I mean, I just study this stuff. But if I were, would I be collecting a bunch of self-report data on people and looking at their interests and trying to match them up? I mean, maybe I'll try again. One day, once we get some new data, get some new ideas about what might work. But today, what I would do is I would just start pulling people randomly, and I would give them the Art Aaron 36 questions to ask each other. And I would give them 60 minutes and have them stare into each other's eyes. And I bet I'd make more couples that way than I would with any kind of matching process. And I think that tells us something about exactly what you're saying, this willingness to be open and be vulnerable with another person. And again, talk about something that does not fit a neat, classic evolutionary narrative, right? You want to be likable in an initial encounter. Stop all the grandstanding, stop the self-promoting, stop the peacocking, and be a little vulnerable. But the science shows this over and over again.
Yeah. And get off the devices and go be in person with, and you make this recommendation, I love it, with a mixed group of people, people who you could be romantically interested in and people who you probably won't because your sexual orientation doesn't go in that direction, but friends of friends of friends is really how connections get made. And, if you kind of work on your loneliness, the romance can follow. Yeah. And I think we just live in this world where it just feels so much easier to stay at home and swipe through options than to get out into the world. Yeah. But then we're not building compatibility. Because and ultimately, and you write this so beautifully in your book, compatibility is constructed through interaction. We can't predict it because it gets made in ways that are unpredictable, but it can't get made at all if we don't get out of our house.
That's exactly right. I mean, look, as you know, I love talking about movies, and I don't know how many people remember Four Weddings and a Funeral.
Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorites.
No, yeah, it's pretty great. But you know what are the relationships I love the most in that movie? It's the relationships among that group of friends. And it's this interesting shifting dynamic where, look, some of them are into each other. And that's actually one of those sort of heartbreaking side plots in that movie. But what's really key, and I think spot on, is that this group of friends, they're always kind of like meeting and hanging out and splintering and hanging out with other people. And they keep introducing people to people through this splintering and reformation process at all of these events. It's mostly weddings that they're attending and one funeral. So I think, look, that's a nice reflection of the way that we used to live. And it was true, like, especially for adolescents. I mean, adolescents, like, I know they're struggling these days. I know they don't go out as much as they used to. But, in the data, the more it's actually mixed gender friends for heterosexuals, the more mixed gender friends people have, the more likely they are to form a relationship in the coming months and years. And I think that's because of this network building process, right? It's like you get introduced to friends of friends or friends of friends of friends, And that's often where the connections happen. And so any kind of advice that, that again is floating around out there, like, men, don't be friends with women. They'll take advantage of you. Like, oh my gosh, I could not begin to disagree more strongly with this.
Yeah, actually, I have one interrupting thought, which is to say, I met my husband in grad school and we were friends for several years and it really grew from that. And I could not have predicted it. And I think that whatever, it's, sample size of one, but it just really speaks to, you don't know where compatibility will grow because again, it gets constructed as you build it.
Oh yeah.
And this is sort of a question in the opposite direction, but where do you land on the question of can men and women who are heterosexual be platonic friends?
Oh, absolutely. And look, there are surveys that look at this, and just in terms of rough numbers, if you just ask heterosexual men and women who are friends, so do you like secretly have a thing for each other? A substantial percentage of them will say, no, absolutely not. We're just friends. And they mean it. And it will stay that way. Yes, there are many cases where these mixed gender friendships harbor some feelings, but those feelings never become anything. And that's fine too. So it's very, very possible. And again, I think this is just an important part of learning a little bit about what somebody's like if they're different from you, if they aren't the same gender as you. What is somebody like if they're interested in a different kind of partner than what you're interested in? Being around different kinds of people, it is mind expanding. It's enriching in a variety of ways. And we see it in the data too. It tends to be a positive predictor of actually finding a partner in the long run.
Yeah. So go make friends, whatever kind they are, get to know people. I mean, that I think is such an important piece of advice. And yet the reality is most people who are single are turning to online software to help them facilitate the process of finding a partner. And you talk a lot about sort of the pros and the cons of online dating. So I wonder if you can just relatively quickly, and you'll have to pick up Paul's book because it provides some really helpful data and guidance in online dating. But what are the major drawbacks of online dating? And maybe leave us with a tip or two of how to manage those drawbacks.
Absolutely. So I think the main drawbacks are that it's a lot of choice. I mean, again, online dating is useful in the sense that you're getting to meet people that you wouldn't have had a chance to meet otherwise. And for people with stale social networks, that can be a really good thing. But it's a lot of choice. And when you get a lot of choice, you kind of start evaluating people superficially. It always feels like there are other fish in the sea. A 20-minute coffee date is sufficient to not continue any further because there are just so many options out there. So this is the part that I dislike the most. I think it is also a bummer, and I don't know how you fix this, but it is a bummer that the online dating market has dramatic levels of inequality. Some attractive, appealing people get all the right swipes, and many people are just kind of left out. And, it's as if you took the competitive parts of the initial impression market that do exist, and you just absolutely turn it up to 11. So these are the components that I don't love. And I think that as these apps, they're getting more monetized and they're grabbing your attention more and more than they're creating relationships, that people are getting frustrated with them. So in terms of advice, it's really twofold. If you're going to use the apps, think of them as a supplement to your main dating approaches, which involve hanging out in small groups, joining things that allow live interaction, preferably on repeated occasions. Improv classes are probably my favorite example of such a thing because not only are you interacting with the same people over and over again, but you're also trying out different modes of interaction, maybe different characters. I think that has a lot of promise. But any kind of intramural sports league, dance class, what have you, these things do exist in most modern urban contexts. And then, look, as you're online dating and you're meeting these folks, if you're bailing after middling impressions on a 20-minute date, you're not doing yourself a service because first impressions are kind of unstable. And you'd be better off by dating a smaller number of people, more times. So maybe give somebody to like a third date, which is when impressions at least are going to stabilize-ish. They're far from perfectly stable after date 3, as you mentioned with your husband. It was like impression number, 300 where your opinion started to change. This absolutely happens. But again, people's time is limited if they're going to be online dating. I advise waiting till the third date before making a call about whether you're going to continue.
Well, I think it's such good advice. I'll add too that one of my favorite tips that you have in your book is something like, for the people that didn't work out for you, have a party.
Oh, yeah. I wish there were easier ways to do this, right? But it's like, you go on a few dates with somebody and you're not really clicking. And you both agree. The both agreeing component is key to this.
Yeah, right.
But then it's like, hey, be my not actual date to this party. We're going to be each other's wingman. And we're going to try to set each other up at this party. And like, I know people who have done this in various forms, and it's kind of a riot. Like, I do kind of love this. Like, hey, we didn't click, but let's work together and help each other out. Like, everybody wins. Like, who says no?
Yeah. It's like when Harry met Sally, right? They set each other up with the discards.
It's one of the
Our discards are somebody else's, like, beshert, as they say in my culture.
So nobody's ever quoted me to me before. I mean, right? You might be responsible for setting up something like that, and that's great.
Paul, I could talk to you about this book forever. It's my new favorite recommendation for all people who are interested in relationship science that is actionable and useful and interesting. And I just want to say, too, that one of my favorite lines from your book was advice that a friend once gave you: nerd, improve thyself. I don't know why, but it's like running through my head all the time now. And the rest of us are very lucky that you decided to fact check him instead of going to the gym and working on your biceps.
Yep. I mean, it took a few years. I took down all the nerdy posters, but I regret it now. I wish I still had them. I don't know where they are. Yeah.
So where can people go to find out more about you and to learn more about the work that you do?
So you can find the book, Bonded by Evolution, wherever books are sold, bookshop.org, or the larger sites. You can find it there. And also, you can find me talking about movies on the Love Factually podcast with Eli Finkel. Just find a movie you like and fire it up and listen to us talk about this same sort of stuff.
Yeah, and we'll definitely link to all of that in the show notes. And I meant to mention it many times over throughout the episode, but I really do strongly encourage people to check out their podcast, Love Factually. It is terrific. They are so funny. You'll learn so much cool science while also getting reminded of all your favorite rom-com movies. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a blast.
That was a fun episode, and now I'm here to discuss it with Debbie. I love this episode, and I love Paul just as a person, but his research is so cool.
Well, I'm really mad because I already have a very long list of podcasts and audiobooks and TV shows that I have not caught up on. And now I have to add a new podcast to my list because the one that you mentioned that he does with movies and this, that sounds fabulous. And I need to check that out. It sounds, what a great idea for a podcast.
It's brilliant. And what's funny is I was already listening to it and Jill came upon it and sent it to me and was like, I think you would love this. It's so my jam. Movies, science. Eli Finkel and Paul Eastwick are collaborators and they riff off each other and they're hilarious, but they take on Hollywood movies and take them quite seriously insofar as they go through them and say, like, how well does this movie portray falling in love, keeping a relationship, making friends? What does the science say? Where does the science differ? For example, the most recent episode, which I was listening to this morning, is about the new movie, People We Meet on Vacations, which is based on a beach read that I read by Emily Henry. It's a total romance novel. And they just explore, when you go on vacation, are you more likely to fall in love? Do you become a different person? How does self-expansion theory align with what the movie and the book represent? It's just so fun. So I highly recommend their podcast, Love Factually. It's on all podcast players.
Yeah, I can't wait to check it out. It sounds so good.
The other thing that I'll highlight about Paul's book and his research more generally is how it helps us to explore the science of evolution. So Paul's work really exposes why evolutionary psychology and research that's come out of that branch of science doesn't quite capture everyday experiences. And it's because it's focused more on what people say they feel and do rather than what people actually feel and do. And so it's just such a nice corrective lens to look at evolutionary psychology through, and has a huge impact maybe on how we read a lot of the messages that are coming to us from the blogosphere, from social media, from a lot of the thought leaders who talk a lot about what men are supposed to do, what women are supposed to do.
Yeah, and I think this was a really interesting part of your discussion with him. As long as there has been evolutionary science applied to humans and to psychology, there have been people out there who take it and use it in this sort of unnuanced and distorted or inaccurate way to make some sort of political point or political agenda. And when the two of you had the discussion about some of the current things that are going on in, as you guys called it, the manosphere, where there's this narrative around masculinity and how in heterosexual couples, the man should be this way and the woman should be that way. And it's kind of gotten a little ridiculous and based on shoddy science at best, maybe no science at all. But there's a backlash to that, which is that a lot of the women who are supposed to love these men, these sort of traditional masculinity types, I don't even quite know how to put this into words, but there's a backlash where a lot of heterosexual women are saying, no, thank you. You know, they're a little repelled by this sort of patriarchal system that they're supposed to be finding desirable. And so, I mean, on a social level, it's like kind of disturbing and also fascinating to watch. But I just love how this conversation was so grounded in taking a look at the problem with that thinking and like, okay, you know, if you look at other species and the involvement in men in child rearing and how we actually lived in these groups and these communal groups, like there's a lot of myth being circulated around by right now. And so it's kind of just cool to hear someone who's really deep in this evolutionary psychology world talk about this phenomenon.
And the challenging thing is that it's based in some science, but the science itself is faulty. But you have people like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson spreading the belief that men and women are fundamentally different in ways that magnify the actual differences. And then you have, as you said, this backlash of like people feel really uncomfortable and then resentful and then like afraid, like what does it mean if I have to engage in relationships with people who just biologically are that way? And out of that, you get movements like the incel movement, which Paul talks a lot about in his book. And the problem is not just that the science is collected in a way that ends up misrepresenting the differences between, for example, men and women, but also that the takeaways are problematic on a lot of levels. So one is that we assume that the differences are larger than they are, and so that informs maybe choices that we would make. The other is that we misunderstand what it means to have biological differences in the first place. And this is a metaphor that Paul shares in his book that I just loved. This idea that just because we are born with something and we can't overcome it is not quite right. And the idea that we can learn new things and have them be really core to how we operate in the world is very true. So the example that he gives is there's this task in psychology called the Stroop task that really leans into the idea that most people learn to read at a very early age. And because we learn it and practice it so often, it's almost hard to stop ourselves from reading what we see. And so in this task, what participants are asked to do is to say the color green, because that's the color that the word is written in, but the word actually says blue. And it's actually very, very hard to stop yourself. So that's a learned behavior. Reading is a learned behavior. Whereas things that are inborn, like your eyesight, how good your vision is, that's biological, but that's very easy to fix. All you got to do is get a pair of glasses. And so this idea that just because it's learned, that something that is biological can't be changed, and that it's difficult for us to learn things that overcome our biological, what we've arrived into the world with biologically is also false. And so I just think this is such a great book and conversation to really shatter some of the myths that actually cause people to make important life decisions. And to have better science is just such a useful thing.
It's fascinating stuff. I'm actually definitely going to put this on my to-read list because it sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's a good one. So we hope you all enjoyed this conversation and get a lot out of it, and definitely send this episode to friends who are in the process of looking for a life partner. And I definitely recommend this book for folks in the dating phases of their lives because it offers some really helpful, actionable, science-backed wisdom.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.